second speaker is Chip Conley. Chip is the strategic advisor for Airbnb, and his topic is the making of a modern elder. Chip is a New York Times best-selling author and hospitality entrepreneur. At the age of 26, fresh out of Stanford, I think, he founded Joie de Vivre, a wonderful Joie de Vivre hospitality, which became the second largest boutique hotel brand in the world. His books share his theories on transformation and meaning in work and life. After 25 years at Joie de Vivre Hospitality as a CEO, he accepted an invitation from Airbnb's founders to help transform their startup into the world's largest hospitality brand. As head of global hospitality and strategy, Chip taught his methods to hundreds of thousands of hosts and created the Airbnb Open. He's the founder of Fest 300, now Everfest, featuring the world's best festivals. He's the recipient of the highest honor in the hospitality industry, the Pioneer Award. Chip holds an BA and an MBA from Stanford, an honorary degree in psychology from Saybrook University, and he serves on the board of the Burning Man Project and Esalen, which is where I last met him. So please welcome to the stage our two extraordinary speakers.
So thank you, Paul. I'm working on a book right now, and I actually quoted Paul in my book, so it was nice to see him here today. I went exotic today, yes. So, and I'm going to start with an exotic quote. I'm going to quote Rumi from 750 years ago. The Sufi poet and philosopher wrote the following. He said, "My life can be summed up in 3 phases. I was raw, I became cooked, and then I burned." Laura, the 3-stage life has a long history to it, all the way back to Rumi's time. So I believe that the digital life that we live today has accelerated our cooking process. There are a growing number of people like me who feel like a carton of milk with an expiration date stamped on our wrinkled forehead. And a lot of those people who are feeling like that carton of milk live here in Silicon Valley. Why? Because in Silicon Valley, what we prize more than anything today is your DQ. If you don't know, that's not Dairy Queen. We prize your digital intelligence, maybe more than your IQ or your EQ, your emotional intelligence. So as goes tech, so does the rest of the world actually follow us here in the Valley, partly because 7 of the 10 most valuable companies in the world today are tech companies. So what does that mean? Well, it means that if 60 is the new 40 physically, when it comes to the tech world, 30 is the new 50 when it comes to power. And what I mean by that is power is exponentially going to the young. And there's a lot of anxiety in corporate boardrooms with companies that are not in the digital world, but we all are in the digital world in some way, as they're worried that their competitor is smarter digitally than them. Example, in 2016, a survey asked corporate CEOs and senior leaders, how strong are you at harnessing technology? In 2016, 67% of these corporate leaders, global leaders of companies, said that their company was pretty good at it. 1 year later, in 2017, same survey, same participants, that dropped from 67% to 52%. And therefore, there is a relentless pursuit of digital natives. And the younger, the better. So what does that mean? Especially for those of us who are not digital natives? Well, if we're going to live 10 years longer than our parents and maybe our grandparents, and power is moving 10 years younger very quickly, do the math. I'm not a Stanford prof, but I know 10 plus 10 is 20 years, and we have 20 years of additional obsolescence and irrelevancy for those of us over 50. Unless we can actually start to value wisdom in a whole new way. Now, I've set this talk up in a rather depressing way for most of us in the room. But I'm an optimist. And not just because I'm naturally an optimist, otherwise I wouldn't wear this shirt, but I'm an optimist because of my last 4.5 years. I'll tell you about that, and I'll tell you about my perspective on why actually this level of digital escalation and exponential growth and how important digital is in our lives opens an opportunity for a new kind of elder to be there. And so I'll get to that. My story is I started a company, Joie de Vivre. Abraham talked about it, grew it, 52 hotels. My last hotel was here in downtown Palo Alto, a place called the Epiphany that opened about 3 or 4 years ago. Sold the company, was going to retire. I sold the company 7.5 years ago, to be honest with you. And I was just helping them get that hotel open after I sold the company. I didn't know what I was going to do next. The decision to actually sell the company was 2 years after I had a flatline experience, and I just knew I needed to do something new. I'm like many people in midlife, something came along and surprised me, and then I knew I needed to hit the reset button. But the first thing I knew I needed to do was just stop doing what I was doing. I needed to do something new, but I wasn't sure what it was going to be. Now, how many of you watched the movie The Intern? Robert De Niro, Anne Hathaway. Robert De Niro says in that film, musicians don't retire. They stop when there's no more music left inside of them. So I knew at about age 50, 52, I still had music inside of me, but I actually didn't know who to share it with. And it was about that time that I got a call. Actually, it wasn't a call because these days it would be a text or an email or maybe a Facebook message, I don't know, from Brian Chesky, who's the co-founder and CEO of Airbnb. And he reached out to me and he said, this is about 4.5 years ago, he said, we are a small tech startup and we're growing, but we have not one person in our company that has a travel or hospitality background, and we want to be a hospitality giant someday. We want to democratize hospitality. We would like to have you join us. And I said, wow, that sounds great, democratizing hospitality, but what's Airbnb? I know, a lot of people know what it is today, but 4.5 years ago, I didn't have an Uber or Lyft app on my phone. I had never heard the phrase, the sharing economy. There's a great quote from a science fiction writer, the future is here, it's just not evenly distributed yet. The future was here, it hadn't been distributed to me. I didn't know what Airbnb or the sharing economy was. So I asked him, I said, are you a subsidiary of Couchsurfing? That's what it sounds like. And he said, no, that's not it. And so I learned a little bit about it, and I was fascinated. But I was also scared, because the more I learned about it, the more I realized this is a tech company. I'm 52 years old, and for the first time in my life, I'm going to join a tech company where one's value is defined by the mantra, I code, therefore I am. And I don't write or read code. I was 52, and the average age in the company was 26. Do the math. Brian asked me to be his mentor, and I was going to do that. He was also going to be my boss. So my boss was 21 years younger than me. 21 years older than me. And what was it going to feel like to get that first performance review from someone the age of my theoretical son or daughter? So I said yes, and then I joined the company. And this was, again, early spring, late winter 2013. We were 1/25th the size that we are today. It was a very small company. The first week, I figured, okay, I'm in a tech company. I'm going to sit with a bunch of engineers and learn what they talk about. So I'm sitting in an engineering meeting on my first week, and the guy who's running the meeting looks at me, room full of engineers and me, and he says, if you ship a feature and no one uses it, did it really ship? Well, I took a philosophy class or two here at Stanford, but no comp sci. I didn't know what it meant to ship a feature or ship product. I was in deep ship. I was clearly in deep ship because I had no idea what they were talking about. And that whole first week, I realized I didn't get the lingo, and I felt really, really old. I sat that first weekend after my first week on the job, and I was thinking I was going to quit. And I was talking with a friend of mine and telling him all of this, and I just said, I feel like I was hired to be a mentor for Brian, who's a really smart, going to be maybe one of the CEOs of his generation, and I can be his mentor, but I actually feel more like an intern because I have so much to learn. And then my friend said to me, can't you be a mentor and an intern simultaneously? And I never thought of that. And that's what I became. So let me tell you my 4 key lessons that I had from my 4.5 years there, working as, on the dark side, considering I'm a hotelier. Still a hotelier. I still do own the real estate of a lot of hotels. So my first lesson in joining Airbnb was I had to evolve. And I actually think these are the 4 lessons that I'm going to talk in a few minutes about what it means to be a modern elder. I think these are the 4 lessons I learned to become a modern elder. My talk is about the making of a modern elder. That was me. And I think we need to figure out how to actually create a lot more modern elders in the future. So my first lesson was I had to evolve. This company did not need 2 CEOs. It had one, and he was 21 years younger than me. My job was to help him be as successful as possible. Did not need me up here, preaching the wisdom of bricks and mortar hospitality, which is what I knew, old school hospitality, boutique hotelier. I needed to learn about them, but I had to, more than anything, learn about myself. How was I going to evolve? So I became Margaret Mead. I became a cultural anthropologist and just listened a lot and studied. And I felt like I was like Margaret Mead amongst the millennials, trying to understand and adapt to this new environment, which also meant I could not be the sage on the stage, which is what I had been for 24 years in my own company. I had to be the guide on the side. And I was no longer the CEO. I was the CEO whisperer. I was the person who needed to get his ego in check and in a much smaller box than it used to be, and be open to the idea that my role here was to help, as Erik Erikson said, I am what survives me. My legacy was this guy, Brian, and this company. It's not me. And that was a great, as someone who started his own company, grew it to 3,500 employees, it was a great lesson. Everybody has a lesson around evolution in terms of their own self. I think if you don't get this first lesson right, you can't do the next 3 that I'm going to tell you about. Because if you go into your job, your new environment, with the way you used to be, and you haven't strategically edited who you are, you're in trouble. And I think our first half of our life is all about accumulating, and the second half of our life is all about editing. And so I think a modern elder is a master editor. Secondly, I needed to learn. Good news is I was in an environment that I didn't understand. I was in tech at 52 at that time. I'm turning 57 next month. And I was willing to have a beginner's mind, which was really lucky. We were a small company, and I could see blind spots because I had fresh eyes, because I was willing to be the dumbest person in the room. And that was a hard thing to do, but I just knew I had to ask questions. So I was like a 4-year-old, asking a lot of why and what if questions, whereas most senior leaders ask a lot of what and how questions, which are optimization questions. But why and what if questions are the kind of things that actually are really inefficient in a conversation because they force you to go in a new direction, but sometimes they help you see things that you wouldn't have seen otherwise. So I want to check my notes here for a second. I also learned that if I'm going to be both an intern and a mentor, I should intern publicly and mentor privately. And what I mean by that is I don't mind being the dumbest person in the room. I just had to realize that I occasionally had to hit a ball out of the park. I can ask a lot of stupid questions and people saying, oh, it's Chip asking that question again. But occasionally I would discover something for everybody in the room about something we hadn't thought of because I had those fresh eyes. But when it came to mentoring, which I did a lot of, and I continue to do a lot of since I'm a strategic advisor, although I'm no longer full-time in the company, that's not something you don't want your father in a meeting with you correcting you when you said something wrong. But when someone actually took the wrong approach to a meeting and saying what they did or how they treated someone else, I'll take them by this, one-on-one afterwards and say, hey, are you open to some advice? Even if it wasn't somebody who was reporting to me. Which brings me to my third lesson. So the first lesson was evolve. Second lesson was learn. Third lesson was collaborate. When you're older, you've built up some emotional muscles over time. You have some EQ you didn't have 20 years earlier. I created an implicit trade agreement with my young friends in the company. I'll trade you some emotional intelligence if you trade me some digital intelligence. And what I saw in the first few months was crazy in the sense that I saw a certain level of dysfunction that had a lot to do with the fact that many of the young people in the company who are incredibly smart understood the face of their phone and its inner workings better than they did the face of the person sitting next to them and that person's inner workings. And as a result, you had meetings where people were cutting each other off and people were just awful with each other on occasion, not all the time, and it wasn't productive. It didn't create effective teamwork. So a friend of mine, a futurist named Nancy Giordano, said, with little training, we expect young digital leaders to miraculously embody the relationship wisdoms we elders have had twice as long to learn. So as power is cascading quickly to the young, they don't necessarily have the tools to actually understand some of the EQ pieces of what you need to do. Luckily, Brian asked me, he threw about 10 other jobs on my plate after I joined, including setting up the learning and development function in the company. So we could teach 28-year-old managers how to lead a 24-year-old direct report. And that had a lot to do with actually how do you create psychological safety for people in a team to feel like they can actually communicate and talk about it. There's a famous Google study about this. Google did a study thinking all kinds of what makes the best teams in the world. As it turns out, the number one ingredient for great teams is the psychological safety of a team, which is a lot of times created by EQ and a leader who knows how to create the crucible for that to happen. The fourth lesson I had was that I was a counselor. That was pretty obvious quickly. A lot of people wanted to talk to me. I was what I call the company librarian because if you go and Google has 100,000 results if you actually put in something into Google, but a librarian may give you just the perfect answer. And so a finely attuned human mind, heart, and soul who's really listening to someone may actually be able to offer you something that a search engine could never offer. Because I've been on the planet a while, and I love reading, and I know a lot of people, I'm pretty well networked, I had a lot of know-who and know-how that I could offer people. And so a lot of people from all over the company came looking to me, and there were, it was interesting, and I said yes a lot, not knowing why I was saying yes, other than I felt like there was a lot of need for people wanting to talk to someone who was not competitive with them. I'm not competing for your job. I'm twice your age. But additionally, people came to me as the confidant. Now, my definition of confidant was it's someone who you go and talk to privately, confidentially, about your hopes, your dreams, your anxieties. But one of my direct reports, who's French, taught me that confidant means that, yes. And that's part of my role, was to actually listen to all these different people from all over the company who were coming to talk to me. But she said, actually, in French, another way you can think of confidant is someone who gives you confidence. And she said, when I come and spend time with you, after I've spent 30 minutes or an hour with you, I have a newfound confidence. You are my permissionary because you give me the permission to just go for it. And so I realized that was part of my role as well. So if you were to actually plot on a whiteboard all of these different people in the company, on all the different teams and all of the different departments, you would realize that there was like a neural network that I'd created without even intending it, which actually allowed me to have a real sense of the pulse of the company as we were growing and doubling, and more than doubling, our employee count every year. And that helped me to be more effective with the three founders, because I had a sense of what was happening in the company. Now, ultimately, I got to the place where it was like, woof, 70 hours a week is something that I didn't want to do anymore. So I'm now just a strategic advisor, which is giving me the time to write my next book, which is called Wisdom at Work, The Making of a Modern Elder. So this idea of the elder came to me when about a year into me being there, someone said, so what is it that you do there as the head of global hospitality and strategy? And I said, oh, here's a bunch of things. He said, I know, but like, how would you distill it down to a word? Are you just like the coach, the in-house coach full-time? No. Are you the mentor? Sort of, yeah, that's true, but I'm sort of like the mentee as well. And are you an advisor? I said, you know what, I am an elder. And I don't even know why I said that, but I said, I think I'm like the elder, but I'm a new form of an elder. The old elders actually were wisdom keepers and dispensers. But I think the modern elder is a wisdom keeper and a wisdom seeker. And they are learning as much as they are teaching. And so what I said, the problem is the word elder is not very popular in pop culture today. It sounds a little too much like elderly. So what I'm believing now, as I'm working on this book and almost finished with the book and starting to talk about it a little bit more, and I'm going to announce something at the end today, which I've never talked about publicly yet, so I'm excited about that, is I believe that wisdom, I want to change the physics of how wisdom flows in organizations. Historically, in a society, wisdom flowed downhill, from old to young. And elders had a role to actually help teach the young, and they were venerated. And that time is long gone. It's not coming back. But I do think we've moved to an era, especially with 5 generations in the workplace for the first time as of this year, that teaching intergenerational reciprocity so people actually can learn from each other the best of what they have to offer, and it actually becomes an exchange, is how the future looks brighter. Because it actually does mean, frankly, someone like me, now almost 57, can go into a workplace with people who are 30 years younger than me, and I can have an effect on them, and they can have an effect on me. Now, for those of you who are having a really hard time with the word elder, I understand. This is not a church elder. This is not a Mormon, 19-year-old scrubbed elder out, to be a missionary. There's some other words that have been reclaimed in the past. If you know the word Yankee, it was the word that the Brits actually called the colonists, 250 years ago or whatever, and they actually said, the colonists are Yankees. But ultimately, the New Englanders took that word back and reclaimed it. Black is a word that Southern racists used to call African Americans, until Malcolm X and others in the movement actually said black is beautiful, and they reclaimed the word. I happen to be gay. When I was a kid, the last thing I wanted to be called was a queer. And guess who took that word back? LGBTQ movement took back the word queer. Own the word, and you have some power. And I actually believe the idea that an elder is important in an era as today is essential. And I don't have a better word. I just don't have a better word than a modern elder. So that's what I'm working with right now. I think we should rethink Rumi's 3-stage life. And I know Laura agrees with this. And here's my attempt at an alternative, a 4th stage, which was I was raw, I became cooked, and then I burned, and then I was raw again. And what does that mean? It means I think it's time for us to rethink the 3-stage life, the tyranny of the lockstep path, age-segregated path, that people actually have to just go on a certain order of life, and that at age 50, especially in the Silicon Valley, they feel like it's over. If you're going to live to 100, at age 50, you are 39% of the way through your adult life. Do the math. So what I'm excited about is saying what I'm going to tell you now. And no one even knows this. Laura doesn't. I'm going to tell this. Other people in this room don't know. I'm going to say this. I'm creating the first midlife Gap Year Academy. Because if you read the New York Times article of a couple months ago, and you saw Wall Street Journal last year, and you've seen there's a lot of articles written about people in their 50s, our focus will be 45 to 65-year-olds. It's a 2-acre property in Baja California on the beach, and people come for 2 weeks to 3 months with the idea of getting raw again, pressing the reset button between 45 and 65, knowing that it is time for them to actually remake themselves and evolve. I was lucky. Brian Chesky came, knocking on my door. There's a lot of people out there who are not lucky. And so over half of the people who will be going through this program are people who will be on full scholarship or partial scholarship. It's all nonprofit. The whole program's a nonprofit. And that will be opening starting in January of this year with a small cohort of about 10 people. And then grow, oh, yay, yeah. And it will be called the Modern Elder Gap Year Academy. So let me finish by, let me make sure I've captured everything, and then I need to sit down so you got some questions, I'm sure. Yeah. I'm going to finish with an African proverb that I love that speaks to the whole question of the elder. An old African proverb is, when an elder dies, it's like a library has burned down. Unfortunately, in modern life, elders and libraries aren't that popular, but wisdom never grows old. And as we live in a digital era where power is cascading very quickly to the young, I believe wisdom is more valuable than ever, evidenced by the mishegas that happened at Uber at the senior levels. Travis could have used a modern elder. And a lot of companies, a lot of fast-growing tech companies could use a modern elder to actually not be there just 1 hour a week, but to be embedded in the organization, almost like a VP of common sense. Thank you.